Howdy y'all, today we're gonna have us black pen shootout. And what we'll be looking at today is something I actually got a few requests for. I have prepared no less than 11 pens for this shootout, and that means I'm not going to go through every one of them here. That would take too much time. So we're going to switch cameras in a second, and I'm just going to show you all the pens, give you a brief rundown. The theme today is slim pens, and in fact it is slim black pens. So there's going to be a lot of slim pens, and they're all black. They have a black finish. I wanted that because otherwise it gets madness. I mean, you can include a Parker 51. That's a slim pen. You can include a Snorkel. That's a slim pen. But I want to try and keep this focused. Have to be black and be slim. And I'm not a huge fan of slim pens, but I know that a lot of people out there are. So that's what we'll have a look at, and we're going to switch cameras right about now. Okay, so here we go with the pens. I would just want to give you a brief rundown of every pen. Because there are so many in this shootout, I'm not going to show you how to take all of them apart. One of the reasons for that is actually that some of them just cannot be taken apart, so it would be a little odd. So I'll just give you a brief comment on every one, and I'm going to ink them up, and then I'll just do a writing sample. Okay, so let's start with the Hero 611. Simple pen, works well. As you can see, it's pretty slim, and I mean I'm really not kidding when I say this is a slim pen. Now this is a really fat Delta Dolce Vita oversize. But even if you were to take a somewhat more normally sized pen, here we have a Monteverde Invincia, you see that this is a really slim pen. Okay, so I'm going to use this as a comparison, and you know what, maybe I'll also use this one. This is a Pilot Metropolitan, so I hope that a lot of you will be familiar with these pens, so that you have a bit of an idea of the size of the pens I'm talking about here. Alright, so this is a pen that it's hard to disassemble. You get a push-type converter, which you can take apart if you want to. It's hard to disassemble the nib and feed unit. If you want to, you can just take a pair of pliers and pull out the nib. I wouldn't recommend doing that unless you really want to, alter the nib or smooth it a bit, or I don't know, increase ink flow, something like that. Alright, so slip cap, simple design. Then we have a Camlin number 4, another very slim pen. The 611 is made of metal, and this one is made of, I guess, some type of plastic. Camlin is an Indian brand, and this is a pen made in India. This is an eyedropper. So that means you unscrew this bit, you just take out an eyedropper, and you just let the ink just, get into the barrel. Just drop it into the barrel, and then you have a lot of ink. And there we go. So another very slim one, as you can see, maybe even a bit slimmer than that 611. Interesting pen, very light because it's plastic. This does have a screw-on cap, so it's fairly secure. And there you have it. Well then, I mean, there's no particular order to these pens. Here I have a vintage Montblanc 22. And back in the day, even the cheaper Montblanc pens, pretty much all pens, had 14-karat gold nibs. An interesting nib. This is an oblique broad. Interesting. This is, I think, this is the only piston-filled pen that I actually have in this particular video. It has a piston, as you can see. It has an ink window. Not sure whether you can see that, but the piston is moving in and out there. Interesting pen. Some of the lower tier Montblanc pens, this one. And this is not the slimmest in there, but I just wanted to include it to get at least one vintage pen in there. This one would be hard to disassemble. You can take out the, you can just unscrew the section, and you can take out the nib if you want to, but it's a bit harder to get the piston out of this pen. Whereas the previous one, the Camlin number 4, you can just pull out. You can just pull out the nib and feed that friction fit. All right. Then we have a Waterman EMA Sphere, which is another fairly slim one, not the slimmest in the sample, but fairly slim. Slip-off cap. This is, I believe, the fine nib, fine and medium. I always forget which nib I have on there. It's a fine, yes. This one you can easily disassemble. Just take off the barrel. You can see it has one of those converters. This is one of the Waterman converters. Fits in there snugly. You can just pull out the nib and feed. They're friction fit. And this is all metal, so this one has a bit more weight. Of course, this is precious resin. This one has a bit more weight to the pen. Alright, this is one that I just thought I had to include. This is the Cross Townsend. This would be a more expensive pen. It may not be. It has a somewhat bulkier cap than, say, the 611. But as you can see, it's a very slim pen design. It's not bulbous, you know. And I enjoy it. It comes with one of the, well, it doesn't come with the converter, you have to buy it separately. But it's a typical cross converter, as you can see, very interesting shape. You can pull out the nib and feed, they are friction fit. I'm not sure whether you would want to do that on a daily basis, but you can definitely do that if you want to adjust the ink flow as I did on this pen. Alright, and then we have one of my first actual pens. This is, I guess, what got my whole interest in fountain pens going again. The Parker Vector. You can also get this in a metal finish, but I wanted this to be a black pen, slim pen thing only. You have to buy a converter separately, another push type converter. Fits in, doesn't seem to fit in extremely tightly, but it does fit and it should work. Disassembling this, you can pull out the nib and the feed. It's not necessarily very easy, but it can be done if you really want to. Alright, then we have the Sheaffer VFM. It's an interesting pen. One of the least expensive Sheaffers you can purchase at the moment, I believe. My one issue with this is converters. It's really hard to fit a converter in. This is a very simple converter. It may look a little odd, but I got that with a cheap calligraphy pen, but it's universal, so this fits a lot of pens. As you can see, it fits this thing beautifully, because most Sheaffer pens take Sheaffer cartridges, but this one actually takes international cartridges. And of course, when you look at this, you think, well, that may just fit, but they did something. I'm not sure how well you can see that, but inside the barrel, things get narrow very quickly. So if you, it goes onto the pen this far, and then when you push it in, you're actually pushing the whole converter thing in and pushing the piston in, and then of course you would get an ink explosion. So I tried a lot of other things. I tried one of those Monteverde mini converters. Even that does not fit. So my last resort is this, the Kaweco converter, the converter made for Kaweco, squeeze type. Now this really should fit, right? So you screw it back in place, only to find that you cannot screw the pen any further than this. Nevertheless, I'm going to use it anyway, because I just want to have a converter in there to ink it up. So this gap should not necessarily be there. Normally it shouldn't be there. Alright. AutoFlapa. An interesting pen, not too expensive, Japanese brand. Auto, this is a true slimline pen, I would say, very slim. You can pull out the nib and feed. Whoops, at least this is what I remember. I have a Monteverde mini converter in there, but you can fit in other converters too. Ah yes, so the nib and feed unscrew. You see there's some glue on there. I probably was not supposed to do that, but I did so anyway, because I like living on the edge. Then you screw that back in place. I'm sure you can pull the nib and feed from that nib collar, although it doesn't really seem to be designed for the user to do that, so be careful when you try, please. Alright, put that back in place. This is all metal too, just like that Sheaffer VFM, by the way, whereas the Vector is plastic. Alright, we're almost there. Then we have a pen. It's interesting, it cost me €3. I got this here in the Netherlands. You can buy this from EMA, which is a type of department store. Interesting, well, I would definitely call this a slim pen. It's fairly small and it's narrow. It's not a big pen. It's not like Kaweco Sport. It's bigger than that, but it's not the world's biggest pen. I found it hard to remove the nib and feed. Probably need to heat that up a bit or something. I'm not sure whether I want to go there. It doesn't come with a converter. I just add one of these cheap Chinese converters that I usually have lying around. That fits really well. It just takes an international cartridge, and it is not too bad. It actually has a metal body and a metal cap, so it's fairly pleasant to use actually. Was a little scratchy, but I mean, as pen-wise, it's fairly robust. Alright, then we have a Cross Century 2. This is the President model. Another very slim pen, as you can see. It's really nicely made. What I like is the section, which has ribs. Makes it very pleasant to hold. It should take one of those cross converters. Currently I only have one, so I'll switch those around when I'm doing the writing sample. Alright, you can pull out the nib and feed, the friction fit, and that's all there is to disassemble here. Alright, and then finally, I wasn't sure whether I should include this, but I decided to do so anyway. This is an Auroraepsilon. As you can see, it's not particularly slim. The cap is a bit bulbous. However, when you remove that, and that was my reason to include it all the same, is that you can. It's still a fairly slim design. It's just the cap that's a little bulbous. All right, it's hard to disassemble this one. At least I had some issues with it. I think it is actually an ebonite feed, not plastic, and it's very hard to pull out that. So I may have to give that some further thought. I think this has a Parker converter in there, but it fits well. It's very secure, as you can see. So there you have it. Here we have all these slim pens, slim black pens. I think we should ink up some pens. That's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to be using this ink. It's just a bottle of Delta. It's a Delta bottle, but it's actually Parker Quink in there. So here we go. Okay, so let's start with the Hero 611. As you can see, it's not as fine a nib as you may expect. Some of these Chinese pens, especially this sort of semi-hooded nib, I've seen that on a bunch of pens. Sorry, there was some overexposure going on there. They have a really fine nib, but this one I think is fairly medium actually. Writing is pretty smooth. I don't really have any issues with that. It's not scratchy. It's a fairly pleasant pen to use. Alright, then let's have a look at that Camlin pen. Camlin number 4. A much finer nib. More feedback too. I wouldn't call it extremely scratchy or anything, but it does give more feedback, and as you can see, it's a fairly fine nib, so that was kind of to be expected, I suppose. Alright, then this would be that Schaefer VFM. It's a smooth nib, especially for something at this price point. I think it's fairly impressive. And my big issue with the pen, as I said, is that converter thing. It's very hard to find a good converter, and I've been unable to. But it's fairly smooth. It's a decent medium nib, I would say. It seems to work pretty well. Alright, then we have a Parker Vector small pen, very narrow. Nib feels a little scratchy, but it is fine. And I've been using this for a long time. So the all metal Vector I have has a medium nib, and that is definitely smoother. So I'm not sure. Maybe I've done this myself by using it a lot in school, etc. All right, then we have the Waterman EMA Sphere, fine nib. EMA Sphere, one that definitely gives some feedback while you write, but not in a bad way. This is the type of feedback that lets you know you're using a fountain pen, if that makes any sense. Some people like their pens to be really buttery smooth, without any type of feedback. I tend to fall in that category, but I also appreciate this pen for what it is, which is in fact a very nice pen, but just a pen that you will feel a bit when you are writing. Alright, well then let's move on to a very nice pen. Here we have that Cross Townsend. You may notice it's a very wet pen. That's because I increased wetness of the nib. I thought it was a little too dry to my tastes when I got it. So it's definitely wetter now, making the ink a bit more saturated. This nib is a joy to use. It's the most expensive pen I've shown you up to this point, but it's really super smooth, really pleasant. I absolutely love this pen. And it's very long. That's something that I find interesting. I mean, if you compare that to a Vector, for example, you see it's a very long pen barrel. You see? Which is interesting. Okay. Then, if I've just had a cross, let's go for the other cross. I have to switch converters here. I'm sorry for the delay. I'll just squeeze some ink into the feed to saturate it. Alright, so here we would have that Cross, Century 2, the President model. I'm going to write that down. This is a fine nib, as you can see, quite a big difference with the regular, no, not the regular, this is a medium nib on the Townsend, which now got a little broader because of my wetting operation. Wetting, making it more wet, increasing flow. Over the LD, you'll have to forgive me there. A fine nib, but one that it may give a bit of feedback, but for a fine nib, I think this is very smooth. I really like that. Alright, then we have something else. Let's have a look. We got an Aurora. Auroraepsilon, if you don't mind, I'm just going to write it down like that. This is a broad nib. Very nice, very smooth, very juicy. I haven't used this pen for a while, and now I notice how nice it is. I really like that. Over the Lazy, over the L-Dog. There we go. L-Dog, that sounds like a gangster name. Alright. And then we have this EMA pen. A fine nib, marked Iridium Point, Germany, nothing too fancy. I have smoothed it out a bit because it was scratching. As you can see, it's a very fine nib, but it does perform well. As I said, it was a bit scratchy when I got it, too scratchy to my liking. Alright, this is the semi-final pen, the penultimate pen. What we have here is the AutoFlapa. Now, this here, first of all, I'm going to squeeze some ink into the feed because it's a little dry. There we go. Hope that works. This is the Japanese fine, so that means it's really fine. You see that the ink is a little less saturated. You get feedback, but I wouldn't call it scratchy. You just feel that you're writing, but it's not an annoying scratch. You don't actually, it doesn't feel like you're getting, you know, caught by the paper or anything. Alright, also this pen, I wouldn't call that semi-flex or anything, but it does allow for some line variation, which I thought was quite impressive. Alright, and then finally we have the Mumbling 22 with its oblique broad nib. Super smooth once you find the sweet spot and how to rotate it. Really nice. I don't use this pen a whole lot because it's a vintage pen. I don't like to take those out with me. But as you can see, that obliqueness combined with some fairly interesting spring makes for a really nice writer. And when you hit the sweet spot of this nib, there's just no resistance from the paper. Now this is very smooth rhodia paper, but it's amazing. I every time it's just like you smear hot butter on a mirror or something. There's just no resistance, and it's a wonderful, lovely bit of line variation you get from that broad obliqueness, and then with a bit of pressure you get this really nice stuff going. Alright, so here we have it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 black slim pens. This was a lot of pens. It was something I was asked about. I hope this is interesting and relevant to a few people out there. And for some probably not. I'm not a huge fan of slimline pens, but then I checked out my collection, and to my surprise I found I had quite a couple of them. So apparently there's something about slim black pens that appeals. I hope you found this a bit enjoyable. I hope this has given you some ideas of pens you may want to check out. And that's all there is to it. So I'll see you later. Bye bye.